If my late political lecturer came back today from the other world, I know what he would say about the return of the one-finger salute waving. But I have absolutely no idea what he would say about two very curious incidences that have happened one after the other in quick succession that have left many Kenyans baffled but very worried. And I must say, others very excited. You'll understand in a minute. The first, thousands of birds attacked State House. That is really what it was. They invaded in large swarms. Information has been very scanty on exactly what happened. But we know that shots were fired. We know that shots were even fired at some of the birds. Because at one point, there was great panic. The second incident, on the eve of the burial of the departed former Emurua Dikir legislator, Johana Ngeno, a large old tree bang in the middle of Kericho town fell. Now, even those who are not spiritual know that when a tree falls, especially a tree that was not planted yesterday, that did not grow yesterday, an old tree, 100 years old, 200 years old, when that kind of tree falls, it means something. It must mean something. But what does it mean? But on my show today, we will also cover the very dramatic events surrounding the funeral services of the late Johana Ngeno. Too much drama. But in my opinion, it confirms what we have said on this channel very early on about what this passing on means politically. Not good news for the Ruto regime. And of course, the regime has moved very quickly to counter any possible negative fallout because the president's close allies have been very deeply involved in the funeral arrangements. But that has not stopped the Wananchi from expressing their feelings, especially their political feelings, openly. Indeed, the one-term anthem has entered Kipsigi's country in a very, very major way. Now, all these three items I've mentioned are linked. Oh, yes, they're very closely linked. I know that is shocking most of us, but let's get on with it right away. Now, in the Kanu days, the waving of the single finger meant Kanu. It symbolized that Kanu was the one and only political party, the only political player in the field, Mama na Baba, if you like, of Kenyan politics. And that is why when multi-party politics arrived, when people were pushing for multi-party, the signal for that was two fingers. Okay? Now, I believe it is normal that if you had a great teacher, you sometimes wonder if you're practicing the same discipline which you sat under this great teacher to be taught about. You will always wonder, what would my teacher have thought in this situation? How would have my great teacher analyzed this? I want to believe that is normal. And in some instances, you will know exactly what your teacher would have said. At least initially, my political lecturer would have said about the one-finger salute, Allah, Kanu imerudi? Then, of course, I would have responded, no, that is a very popular thing in Kenya these days. And it signifies one term, referring to President Ruto having a one term in the presidency. And it is more than instructive that controversial former Nandi Hills legislator, Alfred Keter, visited Emurua Dikir, one of the funeral services. And promptly, there was a one-finger epidemic, pandemic, in fact. You know, most politicians will not see a wave that they do not want to ride on. And I'm sure Keter saw the anti-Ruto wave and immediately after the Ngeno service rode on that wave to speak to a very charged crowd against the Ruto regime and about one term, but more on that a little later. In my opinion, very considered, experienced opinion, this re-emerging of a signal, a political signal, that we saw many decades ago during the Moi era, is yet another confirmation of what we have said in an earlier video, that what we are witnessing here is that the country called Kenya has gone back in history, and history is repeating itself in great detail and in great accuracy of what has happened in the past. Of course, what that means is that it is very easy to predict what is going to happen next with clockwork precision. Oh, yes. And this is very clearly confirmed by the invasion of State House Nairobi by thousands of birds, and further reconfirmed by the falling of a huge old tree in Kericho town. They're all saying exactly the same thing. But let us dive in a little more deeply. It is important to take note of the fact that the invasion of the birds was not a small matter. Why? Because President Ruto himself spoke about it. And his interpretation of what it meant, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many, was very clear. Okay? The way he interpreted it is that this was a kind of spiritual attack from enemies of the regime. And he even faulted it by saying that the problem was in the timing of those who sent these birds. That is really what he meant. I have a different view because I believe this was a very major spiritual signal. However, let us run with the president's interpretation for a minute. Now, admittedly, it is a very easy interpretation to swallow hook, line, and sinker and to completely believe. Why? Because it is not a secret. President Ruto has got too many enemies in the country called Kenya. There are too many people in the country called Kenya who want the Ruto presidency to end as soon as possible. Correction, to end like yesterday. Oh yes, that's rather obvious. Indeed, the best thing to do in such circumstances is to remove yourself, because it is not a good idea in this life to have that many people who are against you and against your administration. It is not safe, it is not healthy, it is not good for you as a human being. Okay, let's have some empathy here. And therefore, obviously, the best thing to do would have been for Ruto to step aside, leave the presidency. In the opinion of many, that is the wisest decision to take. But here comes out the president's character. Ruto can never get into a situation where he looks like he's running away, where he looks like he's a coward. And indeed, we have seen Ruto go to great lengths to do the very opposite of what others would have done. A quick example. During the Gen Z revolution uprising, close advisors, experts who are called upon, strongly advised that he remains out of sight, out of public view, until things cool down. The president, of course, did the very opposite. He had an interview, a live interview, with one of the major media houses in the country, and promptly made things worse. Many Kenyans will never forget that point of the interview, where he was asked about a young boy ambaye alikuwa amekula marisasi nyingi, and the response of the president, and he's still alive, isn't he? What? Ruto even interacted directly with Gen Zs who seemed to be at the forefront of this uprising. We all remember that. He did the exact opposite. Anyway, in my opinion, even if it is true this was an attack from one of Ruto's many enemies in the country, in my humble opinion, there is an even more serious, bigger meaning, spiritual meaning, behind this very strange, bizarre, bad attack, or attack by birds. It is a very clear sign of terrible looming judgment, followed by very major change that cannot be unchanged back to what it was before this particular major change came along. In other words, things will never be the same again. That is a very clear spiritual sign. Just to give you a quick reference, in the Bible, there is a horror scene, a prediction of the future, where birds have a feast na mili mingi sana, wafu wengi sana mahali. Yani wanakula mili ya binadamu. Oh yes, it is in the Bible. Bottom line, very major change is on the way shortly after brutal judgment. Indeed, the bad sign is an urgent red flag to please pay attention. Please stop what you're doing and pay attention. This is important. That is what the birds mean spiritually. In my humble opinion, it is a very chilling warning message that should not be ignored. And even for the doubting Thomases, let us just wait and see if this is indeed what it is, or maybe hii ni story ajabu anawapatia. Okay? Let's just wait and see what happens. The second sign, trees are a very significant spiritual sign. And by a tree falling like this, it signifies the end of an era. It signifies the uprooting of what there was before for something brand new that is completely unrecognizable. Something very different. Of course, the keepsakes of the ground must have interpreted it to mean the falling of a great leader. Yeah, and of course it makes sense because Yohana Ngeno was a great leader amongst the keepsakes community. Of that, there is no doubt. However, once again, in my opinion, I believe it had a much bigger spiritual significance. And I want to link it to something that happened during the Uhuru Kenyatta presidency, when we had several incidences of huge major mugumo trees coming down in very strange circumstances that were difficult to explain. Please take careful note of the fact that the country called Kenya so far has only been ruled by two communities, only two, okay? And Kericho is Kipsigis country, part of the Kalenjin community, that is one of those two communities, while the falling Mugumo trees were in the Agikuyu country, the other community that has ruled Kenya. I don't think it is easy to ignore that fact, at least for us who want a very accurate interpretation of the spiritual signs. And if we are to be honest with ourselves, the developments in our politics, what is happening around, seems to be firm confirmations and reconfirmations of what we are saying. Former Nandi Hills legislator Alfred Keter did not need to work up the crowd. They were already worked up, and so it rode with the wave. Imagine holding an impromptu political rally immediately after funeral service and talking to the people about one term and how Ruto must go. And the response of his audience was very clear, very enthusiastic. You know, when you really think about it, this is crazy. Because this is the Rift Valley. And the Rift Valley have one of their sons sitting inside the State House. Hey, things have really changed. And things are about to change even more in our country. That is for sure. Okay, there is the internal Kalenjin politics, which is very hot right now. I mentioned that in my previous video. Because it is very clear that the Kipsigis community feel that they've gotten a raw deal from the Ruto presidency. They feel that they've been sidelined. They have not benefited from the Ruto presidency. And it is very clear that the passing on of Johanna Ngeno has just made the community even more bitter towards the Ruto administration. What do you think it means? And what do you think it does to the people when leader after leader stands up and calls for thorough investigations into the circumstances surrounding the chopper accident that ended the life of the immediate former Emurua Dikir legislator? What effect do you think that has? And remember, people are already worked up. And so you talk to people like that when they're already worked up, and you make them more worked up. You wind them up even more. What do you expect will happen next? Huh? Tell me your opinion, please. Until next time, this is Chris Karaoke. Kumekucha.